previously on DevProd log. So I need to figure out how to do a circular gradient wipe or a radial gradient wipe instead of a linear one, and then do that against something that's been painted on a UV. This week was supposed to be wrapping up concept designs and starting into rough storyboards. I did not get into the storyboards. So previously I had that radial transition, we got that done. So it's a little rough and tumble, but the basic idea on how to do this is there. I'm fairly confident that I'll be able to place these as planes with UVs on a character without a whole lot of issue. I still need to test that though. I've done some work with UVs on flat surfaces. So you take a plane, you shrink wrap modifier it onto a flat surface, and then you put your UV on top of that. Easy, cool. Not sure how it's going to work on a person just yet, but I'm pretty confident it's going to work just fine. The radial transition itself will need a little bit of work depending on what the sigils and runes are that I have on my character's body. After that, I started working on my summoning circle. Again, this was one of those things where I had multiple pieces together. So I had my procedural flooring, and I also had my circle of candles. The real question was putting that drawn, painted, whatever, chalk circle underneath the candles and above the flooring. A little slow to figure things out, so it took me about an hour or so of playing with the procedural flooring again to recreate it without going back to my previous example and doing it from there. I wanted to make sure that I understood the concept, so I created it from scratch, and after an hour, I ended up exactly where I had with my last procedural flooring. Once I had that, the circle of candles is easy. You know, you create a circle, you add some points to it, you instance your object on that, very straightforward. Then I put the transparent UV over top, which is just that process of putting that plain shrink wrap modifier onto the floor itself, put my transparent UV on top of that. Kind of all works the way that you expect it to. And then I threw together a little animation just to have something to show for all of it. I want to keep working on that animation process to make sure that I'm getting my animation in there. After that, moved on to some fireplace grades. So I spent an unreasonable amount of time attempting to make this metal grid in geometry nodes, and I managed to crash Blender twice while doing so. And the key takeaway here is, if you're going to use a mesh grid and then convert it to a curve and then back to a mesh with a circle curve as profile, maybe do your Boolean mesh on the grid before converting it to the curve, then after the fact when it's got all this other stuff going on. So I managed to crash it twice doing that, and then I realized maybe I need to do the Boolean earlier. Got it working. Once I did that, I put together this version of the grate. I did 3 variations on the fireplace grate. So this one is a very simple one, almost like some metal piping with the metal grate underneath it. Then this was my second attempt, which is kind of a fancier cast iron attempt. The third attempt is somewhere in between. So something that looks good, has a bit of weight to it, and then also has that little grate inside of it. I got some weird kind of glitching in the mesh here. I'm assuming that has something to do with Boolean on a grid. I'll figure it out some other time. I'm sure it's a common thing. Then once I had them all together, I threw together this little animation, again, to keep exercising those animation skills. I don't know what this is. It kind of feels like a bad infomercial maybe, or like a store in a bad video game. I'm not super jazzed about the rotations in it. It's definitely something that I'll want to be cleaner in the future on. I basically just took all these, did a 360 rotation on all of them. I think it was the X and Z I did 360, and then the Y I did negative 360. So very straightforward. Wasn't really worried about how those rotations look, but it's something I want to work on in the future. Next thing to do is storyboards. We're actually starting to get into the meat of this, so we'll see how that goes. I did start looking at it this week, and when I went to do a character, it fell apart. There's clearly a big gap there for me, but now's not the time to worry about my character mesh creation.